Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Captain Dave with the Atlantic Cup, and our education program is presented by 11th Hour Racing. And today I got a special friend, good friend Hugh Piggin, with me. Hugh is from New Zealand. He's a New Zealand native, and he's actually the race director for the Atlantic Cup race. Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
Morning, Dave. I'm pretty good.
So you're there in Newport, and unfortunately this year we've had a bit of a struggle with the COVID-19 situation going on. So the Atlantic Cup race is up in the air. And tell me a little bit about you and about your sailing and how the Atlantic Cup race came to be.
Yeah, right, Dave. You're right. We certainly live in some very challenging and interesting times right now. It's pretty good to see how everyone's adapting to it and finding ways that they can still do things. So it is pretty interesting. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm originally from New Zealand. I live in Newport, Rhode Island now. I've lived here for coming up to 20 years. And basically, I end up in Newport via sailing. I left New Zealand, got a job on a boat to do some sailing, take a year off and see the world and do some traveling as a young person. And I'm still here doing it. So, yeah, I've done a lot of sailing, especially in the northern. Sorry?
It gets into your blood, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sort of does. It does. I've done a lot of sailing around the northern hemisphere. I've sailed on everything from big mega yachts to little small sport boats, and I've been lucky enough to make that a career, and sailed on some pretty neat boats. I did some of the coolest boats I've sailed on are the multi-hulls. I sailed for a while on Team Adventure, which was a 110-foot round-the-world racing multi-hull, one of the first of that ilk, of that maxi catamaran. I sailed on that until we were doing the transatlantic record attempt, and we actually hit a submerged object and broke 30 feet off the bow of that in the North Atlantic. And so we limped back into shore, and that was the end of the sailing for that boat. It would damage the boat so badly it wasn't repaired. And after that, I went over to France and spent a couple of years sailing with the Orma 60s, which is the class is not going any longer, but they were 60-foot trimarans that the French used to race around. They used to sail them single-handed across the Atlantic. They used to race them in Grand Prix fashion and all sorts of things. It was pretty cool sailing.
Those were kind of the early days of the big catamarans going really fast and kind of pushing the envelope on speed and boats. But then they've grown to enormous boats that they sail single-handed now, haven't they?
Yeah, these guys are sailing 130-foot catamarans single-handed, the old teams, and they're racing them around the world, breaking around the world records and all sorts of things. It's absolutely impressive what they've got these boats doing now.
Yeah, I just watch that stuff and I just marvel at how, one guy can race this thing single-handed for 45, 50 days around the world and manage it all. But so the Atlantic Cup is raced in Class 40s. Have you done some Class 40 racing?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of Class 40 racing. I did the TJV in 2011. TJV is a race from Le Havre, France. At that stage, it was ending in Costa Rica. So we spent 25 days racing across the Atlantic double-handed on a Class 40, which was that's probably one of the coolest events in my sailing career. I think that was pretty tough, pretty rewarding though. And apart from that, I've done a lot of Class 40 sailing around a little bit around England, mostly around the east coast of the US, some in the Caribbean.
So when I was in New Zealand, I was really, impressed is one word, but emotionally touched by an experience I had by going to see the Fox Glacier. You guys, New Zealand's an amazing country, and I guess it's relatively young as far as geologic time and stuff goes, and you've got quite a few glaciers over there, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of, we've got, I think the number is in the thousands down on the South Island. Two major ones, the Fox Glacier and the Franz Josef Glacier. And yeah, you're right, it's a spectacular part of the world down there, and it's pretty cool to go and look at. And to make that part of your around the world trip would have been pretty spectacular. Why don't you tell us a bit more about your experience down there and with the glacier?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I sailed into New Zealand from Cape Town, South Africa to New Zealand. It took 52 days. And when I first approached the South Island by boat, coming across Tasman Sea, I mean, there in front of me was this amazing display of mountains and snow and ice and stuff like that. And I really had no idea what all was going on there. But having spent a little time in New Zealand, we went traveling around and went down to that area and explored. And we actually went to the Fox Glacier and did a tour of it. And that other interesting thing is that's right in the area, I think, where Sir Edmund Hillary trained for his ascent of Mount Everest. And Cook Mountain, was it, I think, and stuff. So
Yes, yep, Mount Cook.
That's kind of a big, important part of history right there. Is that's Hillary did his training and stuff there. But I've got some pictures and stuff of the Fox Glacier here. I'm going to put them up on the share here for you. So this is a picture of the Fox Glacier right when we got to it. Like I was saying, I grew up on the southern tip of Lake Michigan, and the Great Lakes were all formed by glaciers. And so it was kind of neat to go to the Fox Glacier and to see a glacier, firsthand. And of course, the glaciers of Great Lakes, that was 10 to 100,000 years ago. But this is in real life stuff here. So this is a picture of, you can see how deep that crevice is there. And this is looking over the field. So this picture perspective is taken from what they call the terminal edge, or the leading edge, where it's all melting and falling off, looking up the glacier, up into the mountain valley. And we got a chance to go into this ice cave one day, and there's me inside the ice cave. But the interesting thing is that this is moving very, very slowly. I think the rate is like 600 feet a year, which is like 2 football fields over the course of a year. But our guide told us that these caves just open up some days and then they're gone and closed up 2 or 3 days later. So we were some of the first people to ever get to walk through this ice cave, which was just amazing. I felt like I was in the soul of the earth at that point. I've got a video here. If it comes up here, there it is. It may take a minute to buffer here, but this is a really huge rock. This rock is the size of a semi-truck.
Huge boulder here. It's been traveling. The senior guides around here first saw it in 2008, way up in the hills up there. And they say they've watched it move all the way down through the years, down through the ice like that. Apparently they say that they've never seen it move, but it has traveled. They've been able to document the travel of this rock. They've seen all the sides of it, but nobody's ever seen it tumble or move because it just happens so slowly. It gets forced up by the ice and pushed around like a pebble. It's just amazing, the size of it, and it sticks right up there. And it's obviously headed downhill.
So this now is looking down the slope of the glacier. You can see the river way down over here where it's melting away.
Yeah, you can see the scale of the thing with the group of people standing down there. It looks like absolutely massive country. What do you recall how old the glacier is and how big it is, Dave? That particular one?
I don't recall how old that Fox Glacier is, to be honest with you, but I know that parts of it are 1,000 feet thick. And the terminal edge of it, where it actually casts off and stuff, is about 100 feet high. Our guides took us onto there, but as we walked onto the edge of that glacier, we have crampons, which are like spikes you put on the bottom of your feet so you can walk on the ice, and then ski poles to help balance us and all as we wandered up through the ice. But you could see up the sides of the valley where the mountain had been scraped clean of any vegetation, all stuff. And the guides told us that just the previous year, that's the level at where the ice was at. So it melted off quite a bit.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, it'd be fair to say that glaciers themselves are a pretty unique part of the geological history of the land and the world as we know it today. Parts of it have been, their formation is due to glaciers. And
one of the neat things.
Tell us a little bit about the how glaciers work on the landscape.
Yeah, so they collect the snow way up in the up in the top of the mountain, and then that snow just collects over years and years and years, and the pressure and the weight of that snow makes forms it into very tightly compact ice, very hard ice. but the weight and pressure of that on the ice then actually melts the lower level of the ice, so it starts to slide down through the mountains. And as it melts, it creates a river sort of underneath it, which helps to melt it off. But at the same time, more snow is collecting at the top, so it's essentially a river of ice moving very, very slowly. One of the neat things, I mean, like you say, all around the world there are parts of glaciers, but a lot of our sailors on the Atlantic Cup sail through the Cape Cod area, around the Cape Cod area up to Portland. And that Massachusetts and Cape Cod area where Nantucket is and Martha's Vineyard, that's all formed by glacial work too, 100,000 years ago. So at one point, an awful lot of North America was covered by a huge ice sheet, which has slowly melted off in the last 120 years or so, but particularly in the last 10 to 15,000 years, gave us the Great Lakes and of course, Cape Cod and Nantucket and that whole area there. I live right down here on the southern tip of Lake Michigan, but all these Great Lakes were formed by the glacial thing. And then also, here's the Cape Cod area. So glaciers covered an awful lot of this here at one point. And
I know Narragansett Bay owes its formation to a glacier action and presence there. So it's fair to say that a lot of our sailing playgrounds are due to glaciers, and we can thank the the glaciers carving out this landscape for us hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Right. So here. Now this is a picture of me sitting on that Fox Glacier, and you can see the other person over here to the right, just to give you a bit of a scale of it all. So like I said, essentially from over here on the right side where you see the vegetation gone, and then over here on the left where you see vegetation gone, that was all full of ice at one time a few years ago. And this river of ice is just flowing down. Now the terminal end where the glacier ends, this is a cave that was underneath the glacier, and all this is whitewater rapids coming out from underneath it. So a real heavy flow of melted ice is coming out from underneath that glacier, which is part of the whole process. And as it melts, it changes the landscape. It pushes the big rock down the hillside, and leaves things. Here's a slide of 1,400 years ago. This is the Great Lakes again, where my home is at, and this whole area was covered with ice. Now, 4,000 years after that, 3 or 4,000 years after that, it started to melt and recede, leaving us these basins where the Great Lakes are. This is Lake Michigan, Lake Huron over here, Lake Superior, Erie, and Ontario. And then, around these perimeters of these areas are where a lot of, the sediment that comes off the glaciers as they melt away, the rocks and the dirt and all stuff are built up. So you can have a real hilly section of area, which we call a moraine, and that moraine is generally where that terminal end of the glacier was when it started to recede. And so as it melted off, it leaves these big rocks just, sitting in places. So this big rock that we saw in the video could end up like this one here, just in the middle of a park someplace. So they're looking completely, totally out of context. So it's really amazing what these forces of nature do for us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's I think in our area of the world, I think Block Island is responsible. The moraine that the glacier carries with it, all the rocks and everything that it scrapes off the valley as it travels down over hundreds of years, is deposited at the terminal end there and creates land features. I think Block Island is an example of that in our area. So they really are a unique phenomena in the geological world with the formation of these land features.
And they really are, and it's kind of interesting. But of course, nowadays, we're all greatly concerned with climate change and global warming. And, one of the early indicators of that was the ice sheets, I guess, that are left remaining, basically the Greenland sheet and then Antarctica. And scientists started to notice that these were shrinking in size, and that was sort of like an early indicator that something was going awry in our climate or environment. And as they investigated that further, and started to notice the huge. Most everybody's heard a lot about the glaciers in Iceland and Greenland melting away, and then some of the big, huge ice shelves down in Antarctica breaking off, like the size of our small states, Delaware and so that, and floating, up into the ocean. And so that's become a great big concern for a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something everyone's keeping an eye on, and I think it's something that the coming generations are going to have to address and tackle, and hopefully in our generation we can actually start doing that.
Yeah, I mean the without question. I mean, one of the big consequences of all this melting ice, of course, is sea level rise, and this graphic here, all the little red areas are areas that will be impacted by a sea level rise of just 3 feet. Interesting to note, back when the glaciers were coming over the Great Lakes and over Nantucket and Block Island and Narragansett Bay, and that whole big ice shelf that covered most of North America and Northern Europe, the sea level was 120 meters lower than where it is now. So the melt of all that ice rose the ocean about 450 feet. Now they expect if we continue with the ice melt that we're getting from the climate change now, we're going to see, 1, 2, 3 foot rise in sea level, in the next 50 years, which is going to devastate a lot of the local coastal areas. So it's an early indicator, and hopefully it's giving us a fair warning that it's time to change something or other.
Yeah, it is scary what they're predicting if it carries on the way it does. It really is. I mean, a lot of the world's population lives in coastal communities, so it is going to impact those people a lot.
Yeah, I don't think we ever really realize how many of us rely on water for our lives. Not, as human beings, we need fresh water to drink, and our plants and our farms and stuff need water to grow plants. But along the coastal areas, so many people rely on fishing and the ocean to travel. So it's just natural human nature for people to gravitate towards living near a water source. Very few people live in the middle of Sahara Desert. Most people gravitate towards the ocean coast and all stuff. So the sea level rise affects most all of us in one way or another.
Right, and it's fair to say that we use the glaciers as an indication of that phenomena. So right now we're seeing the glaciers melt and recede, and that's an indication that general indication that things are getting warmer.
Yeah, I think I heard a statistic that I thought was pretty amazing, but the amount of ice that's melting from the Greenland ice shelf was equivalent to 1,000 elephants walking into the ocean every minute.
Wow.
As far as mass, which is hard to imagine, but the world's a very large place, and our whole ecological system is all based on balance. And as things change, or as we heat up the earth, if we're heating it up with CO2 emissions and our greenhouse effects, if we indicated in some of our earlier videos, some other balance has to change to compensate that. So the ice melts, the oceans rise, and it's dynamic, it's exciting, it's interesting and fun to watch, but it's also, I think it's an early indicator that we need to be much more aware of our impact as human beings on the earth and taking care of our oceans and being good stewards.
Absolutely, and that's what the Atlantic Cup Kids program is all about, especially with the help of 11th Hour Racing and their sustainability initiatives. So if I know we've got some information on the Atlantic Cup Kids porthole about glaciers, and as well as a lot of other environmental and sustainable topics. Dave, where can we find out about that?
Yeah, we do. And if kids or teachers or parents and kids want to delve into this a little deeper, you can go to atlanticcup.org/kids portal, and you'll find our worksheets. We have worksheets on the glaciers. We have worksheets on mathematics. We have worksheets on geography, wildlife, oceanography. There's a lot of really fun, great education there. Thanks to you and Juliana for putting the Atlantic Cup together. Look forward to being on the water with you again soon.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. It's been good, and maybe we can do something else in the future, and do another little video in the future, and look forward to working with you more on the 11th Hour Racing Atlantic Cup Kids program.